My wife had not seen a lot of Star Trek, so it was an excuse to sit her down. We did some from every, the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. That was kind of a showed her a bunch. And she really enjoyed it. And she said, I see why you like this, because every episode at the end of the day is about justice. Yeah. And she's like, and you're psychotic about that. I mean, whatever it is, in whatever iteration, it finally is about justice. And what's been astonishing to me over the years, because I've gotten to, through some of the writing I've done with people I've worked with, I've gotten to know a lot of people who are involved with mostly the original series, which was, again, we talk about sort of goofy in retrospect, but at the time, pretty radical stuff, for TV. And what's really, you look at, like, George Takei is actually pretty run-of-the-mill for most of the people involved with Star Trek. He's this, just incredible centrist who's like, completely obsessed with Trump and Russia, and despises Bernie and so on, so and beloved. And I just, as someone who, that show was formative. I watched it as a kid, and it was like the idea of this future that, yes, I grant they still have a military. Wyatt, we're going to fix that. We're going to fix that in 100 years. It's for defense.
They're defense torpedoes.
But it is this optimistic utopian vision of like, here's something you can aim towards, and here's a world that would be better to live in. And for all that, the people who watch it and are moved by it are still incredibly traditional. Many of them in their politics. They're like, well, we can't actually have any of that. That's all. And maybe making it a fantasy is the problem. Maybe it's because it's a fantasy, it gets to deal with issues that you can't normally on an ordinary TV show or as overtly. But also by being fantasy, it tells people this can't happen. Maybe.
I think that's a good point. I think a lot of people, when leftists bring up points that I think are good, like everyone should have healthcare, and just like things that seem like they're possible. To some people, that just seem like fantasy. They're like, well, it's never happened before.
Yeah,
right.
Not in this country. I've never seen it before.
We should have flying cars too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they're like, well, how would we even do that? And there are ways to do it, but they don't know how to do it. No one's ever explained it to them, so they're just like, it's impossible.
We should have a show that's just called Norway.
Right?
it's framed as a sci-fi. There's like sci-fi graphics, but after the opening credits, it's just Swedish people.
and then at the end, it's like, this is this year.
Or like 1985. We're aiming for Sweden in 1985.
Right.
I have a question. So you have the Starfleet, right? And like people can join the Starfleet, but they're not obligated to. So they're not drafted into it.
It's hard to get in, actually. It's competitive.
So there's Starfleet, and there's
like West Point.
Right. Well, stop. Wait.
So you're
West
doing
Point doesn't have science officers.
The science. So society, the Federation, they're paying for Starfleet, and they're just to go around and
there's no money
to just take your shirt off and punch an alien or whatever it is that Kirk does. But what does everyone else do in this post-scarcity society? Like, do you ever see what civilians are like?
Occasionally.
Do they work?
Yeah.
They're like
the writers. Cisco's father owns a restaurant.
Yes.
So everyone still works.
Well, the episode that you were watching with where the surveillance stuff was happening, like that, those scientists weren't. I don't think they were Starfleet scientists. They were like a private company contracted by Starfleet to surveil those proto-Vulcans. They were the Blackwater.
They were Blackwater.
Okay. You know what?
How are they paid, though? There's no money.
That sounds like fake news. I don't recall them.
Is everything just a hobby then? It's like, my dad owns a restaurant, where you can just hang out and not pay and just eat food.
Yes.
I just do.
You'd have 20
for the hell of
podcasts
it.
in this world, Virgil. You would have 20 podcasts.
Okay, so I guess my question is in this version of the future, I'm just doing the same bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm just on Twitter getting into freaking arguments.
Yes, we've cracked
Pete
the
Buttigieg
Star Trek
supporters.
code.
Okay.
Here's the thing. Is there anybody here not doing what I can't imagine. I mean, I'm looking at two comedians. Nobody goes, oh, Christ, I have to go be a comedian. It's my only hope of making a living, right? I mean, you guys are doing what you want to do. I know it's tough, but everybody right now that I'm looking at is doing what they want to be doing.
Yeah, I mean,
which makes this a different conversation to some extent.
Yes, this is. I'm sorry. I'm just looking at this on the screen, and I just get this vibe that you're like gently saying to Wyatt. So, what are you doing with your life?
No, I mean, we'd all be doing the same thing. We'd all be doing the same thing in the Star Trek universe.
right, but without like
question I
questions
have-
student debt from law school.
Like, what happens to it's always that thing. Like, who collects the garbage?
Well, that's the okay. So something that has come up on these episodes before is also this
robots.
idea.
Robots.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Angela,
Yeah.
never
Are
mind.
there
I
robots?
retract the question.
Okay, are there
That's the
Robot
theory.
rights.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
are there robots? Because this was another question I had. I did not see any robots, and I was really pissed off. Like
It's
extremely
seamless. It's
pissed.
Did you watch
Integrated.
Next Generation?
I watched 2 episodes of Next Generation. Well, I watched like a couple.
Data is a robot. He's a member of the crew.
That's true. Okay, but I'm picturing, more like the
He's
metallic
got rights.
man type deal, like a C-3PO type fellow.
Yeah, the problem is Data has rights now. He's got.
Well, because he's sentient. Well, look, to your question, Virgil, you have replicators that are making the food. I think that the idea is almost it's seamless and integrated and into the workings of the ship. So you're just not seeing garbage collection, but the garbage is getting collected. Tasks that no one wants to do ostensibly
AI.
are animated. Are automated rather. And one of the episodes that somebody suggested with Daystrom inventing a ship that can basically self-pilot really gets to the core of this question about automation, right? So in the plot, it's an original series episode. I think it was you, Wyatt.
Yeah.
What's the name of that episode again? The Ultimate Computer. And the Ultimate Computer, basically this boss scientist who I had forgotten was black. Invents basically a
and he was
computer.
also Blackula, I believe.
He's black. He's William Marshall and the king of cartoons.
That's right. Yeah.
What's the king of cartoons?
From Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Or Pee-wee's
Oh,
Playhouse.
really?
Oh yeah.
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 Crossover. Well,
Sorry, you were saying Daystrom.
Daystrom invents a computer that that basically makes everyone on the ship obsolete. And obviously, Captain Kirk, with all of his machismo, is very perturbed by this and says a bunch of stuff about how like you can't replace a man. What is a man without work? He starts quoting Peter Pan. It's like a whole thing. Or it's not Peter Pan. It's not the second Star Trek, right? But he quotes some old Earth poem about ships and sailors and how this is like in his blood. And it's a complicated episode because I'm rooting for Daystrom on some level because in my future utopia, I don't want people to have to do anything that they don't want to do. But of course, something comes up the computer can't handle. The computer makes a bad ethical choice and ends up like blowing up a ship that it shouldn't blow up. And it's reaffirmed that human beings and our ability to judge ethics in the moment is superior and Captain Kirk gets to have a job. But I kind of wanted a resolution that said, in a world where they really could replicate Captain Kirk, it wouldn't be a bad thing if Captain Kirk could go off and do things even that he just wanted to do even in a more pure way without being, working for the space navy
Just have
or
space
whatever.
sex with alien ladies.
Well, but I think that gets to this idea of like we assume nobody wants to do some of these things. Like there are people who might actually be interested in sanitation and ways to make it more efficient and be thinking about those things, or just enjoy, waking up early and riding on the side of a truck. And they're not as like we see it and we say, oh, I don't know that I could do that. But there are other people who might be very interested in that.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing about an episode like that and that idea of automation and where Kirk is like, well, the thing I really want to do is be the captain of this ship that I'm secretly in love with. I think it kind of speaks to this idea that as we automate society and as things change, what do we do to provide for people? Like it's that idea like, oh, you can pursue anything, but if you don't really know what you want to pursue, then you may languish. It's, I think we can look at it in like West Virginia where it's like, oh, okay, we're going to get rid of coal. And you have generations of coal miners who now find themselves saying like, well, wait a minute, if this isn't going to be a career anymore, who am I? And somebody's like, well, this is great. You can go figure it out. But, we're in a society where it's like, well, but you don't actually have the resources available to you. to go back to college or to even just while you're in high school get the best quality education you can to find that other path.
Well, isn't the issue there that you need the coal mine? They need the coal mining for work, for sustenance, for money, and that there aren't other career opportunities in the environment on top of not having money to leave or have education, etc. Star Trek is different, right? Star Trek presumes that no one needs to buy food. Everyone's provided adequate shelter. There's no need to pay for insurance. So that in that world, I would put to you that people wouldn't want to go down into the mines, which are very dangerous and bad for their health and have, killed generations of their
I do it as like a fun afternoon thing. Like you ride the old-timey elevator and
we could breed clones that would do all that stuff. We could make them a different color.
Okay.
No? Are we not? Is this not a popular idea? The blue people. They're the blue people.
We're not talking about
But then people are going to be like, well, they deserve rights too. Blue people can't vote?
God,
What's going on?
And then they're like, Blue Lives Matter. Wait a minute.
God damn it. No.
You guys are literally
Wyatt, all
crazy.
lives matter, you son of a bitch.
But do we I'm interested in this pushback because do we think that if we didn't have jobs, everything would go to hell? Like, do we think that people would
That's
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Please.
Oh, no, just listening to you because I'm thinking like that's an episode I've never seen and they would never deal with because they're all these like, highly driven people writing and making these shows. And I'm like, where's me? Where's the guy on Star Trek who's like, I'm cool, I'm fine. I'm like, I do some podcasts now. And I write. I like writing. I'm good at it. But if I could just goof off, I'd goof off.
And
like, where's that guy on Star Trek? Where are the people who are just like...
Well, Jake Sisko's a writer.
Because everyone on the ship is
just
like
the
a type
holodeck
A.
The holodeck A is just like totally like packed because Rick's been in there for 7 hours. He's not even doing anything that exciting. He just made his childhood bedroom and he's just napping.
Okay, so this brings me to
But I would do that. Come on, that'd be cool.
That's an interesting thing to think about because like when it was a time where we would farm for ourselves or there are hunter-gatherers, you spend your day getting food, preparing food, making clothes, making shelter. Those weren't jobs because that was survival. That's how you lived. And then so now that there's technology that helps a lot of that stuff, and then in this show where that stuff's just taken care of. Yeah, what do you do? That doesn't feel like a job. It does make you feel fulfilled, or do you even need to feel fulfilled?
According to Star Trek, you run a Cajun restaurant because your family has always had Cajun restaurants and you love to cook and make your neighborhood happy.
Yeah,
it's unclear whether or not he charges for that food, so I've always assumed he doesn't.
Is there even a barter system of any kind, or just like?
I mean, in
I just take your goods and I go.
In Kirk's world, the barter system is sexual. Whenever I think of like a socialist utopia, I always I think about college in many ways where, your meals, if you're on a meal plan and you have housing, but the difference, and I guess this is the difference when I think about that idea of like, what happens if you don't have that a job that you have to do? I think what works about college is like, well, in front of you have all of these resources. You have a library. You have different departments that you can go explore. You have gyms and soccer fields and all these things that you can find. You can just go pursue whatever is of interest to you. I think I brought up West Virginia and thinking about coal miners in part because I had spent a little time there for my show that Brianna so nicely name dropped earlier. But being in West Virginia, one of the things I went to this one mining town and I was spending some time with a miner, and it was a town he grew up in.
With a miner?
A miner, yeah. A 4-year-old coal miner. His name was Terry, and he had the cutest little cough. Oh my gosh. The cutest little cough, and just was like, I have to go back in the mines now. Hope you had a good day. And I was like, thanks, man.
It's so dark down there.
He might have actually been 50, but because of all of that exposure to, it just stunted his growth.
This is what gets us canceled.
No, I was hanging out with a coal miner, and one of the things that was interesting as we were in his town, he was from the town of Matewan, which the governor of West Virginia is also from Matewan. The governor of West Virginia is the richest man in West Virginia. A coal mine, owns a coal mine, and seems to be a real piece of work. And by work, I mean shit. But the thing to hear this coal miner talk about it, he was like, the thing in this community is there is nothing. They've gutted the schools. They're all there are churches, bookstores have been turned into churches. It's just churches, and church's chicken. They don't even have church's chicken, if I'm being honest. They had a Pizza Hut.
What do they eat after church?
Pizza. There was the only couple chains. I think it was a Pizza Hut was the one chain that was there. But it's that idea that okay, we've taken the one trusted source of work, but we haven't actually given you anything back. There are no music programs. There is no art. And he talked about when he was in high school, they did have arts programs. They did have those things. And his wife became an art teacher, and and it was inspired in these ways that these areas have been so gutted. So when we think about things like automation, it's also that part of it that is all right, but we're not really leaving people with a world to explore, or the courage to go explore, because it means leaving everything and hoping that you go make it, but making it is going to cost you a lot of money and probably a lot of other things too.
That kind of goes back to, what you were talking about earlier with sort of art and its relationship to this stuff. It is definitely an idea that is not, there's so many kind of progressive ideas that are put forth in art and comedy in so many ways, and sometimes they're subversive and sometimes they're overt. But the notion that it's all right not to want to work, that's just something that nobody ever wants to talk about, that we just don't want to, but we don't need everyone to work. Society will function if more people just sleep in and more people start podcasts, and it's.
I think society would fall apart if people only did podcasts.
Only, yeah. Well, yes, sure.
If there were too many podcasts, we would crumble.
There are. I would argue there are, but
and that's why I'm pleased to announce my new podcast.
Talk
One
about podcasts.
too many.
That's a pretty good title, actually.
But there's no, even on Star Trek, on none of these things, these utopian visions, we never look into that too much. We never get too much into art and art for its own sake, and the importance of just having sort of things to do that fulfill you that aren't employment based.
Let me push back on that. Because what we do see in terms of Star Trek and people who are outside of the Federation are the following. We see the chef, which I would argue, Sisko's dad being a chef, which I would argue is a kind of art. We see Sisko's son being a novelist, which is art. We see a
novelist who was hooking up with a lady who was much older than him when he was a child.
Wait, who was Jake hooking up with?
That's right.
He was hooking up with. She was a cocktail waitress in Quark's bar.
Oh, yeah. I must have blocked that because of my Jake crush. I couldn't handle the competition.
Yeah, he was a 15-year-old dating an adult woman.
I was also 15, to be clear.
Yeah, that crush is okay. The thing that happened on the show was not okay.
Yes. Jake should have been with me. That was.
But those are all people pursuing some sort of, dream. I mean, those are all they're very driven. Sisko's dad doesn't just run a dopey restaurant. He runs the best Cajun restaurant in New Orleans.
Yes, art. And then for leisure, you see on the Next Generation all the time, what do? They play concerts. They all devote their free time to becoming experts and expressing themselves through music.
When Riker's not being a super cop, he's playing a trombone.
It's not a super cop.
He's kind of the super cop of that show. He's very much the one who's like, let's just go fight people.
William Riker does not just randomly go and fight people just because he has a rakish veneer.
No, sometimes he gets addicted. He gets the whole ship addicted to a video game drug thing.
I thought Wesley brought that thing on board.
No, that was Riker because he was hanging out on Risa and then got addicted to a drug and then got the whole ship addicted to drugs.
Okay, but what we're saying is that leisure is ultimately okay as long as
but it's the leisure of working people. They never come across anybody who's like, oh, what do you do? Savok.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I think, but that to me, what that says is that when people are left on their own and they don't have to have a job, they find pursuits that they find to be intrinsically valuable, like Vosh. Look at Vosh. Captain Picard's love interest is this wandering archaeologist woman who just appears in cargo shorts and his quarters sometime, usually with an omniscient being called Q. And I don't think that she archaeologizes for money. Well, that's not a great example because I'm pretty sure she steals.
Yeah, I think she does. She's like always stealing
on the black market. Okay,
Yeah.
Vosh is complicated, but the fact is she does what she loves. And isn't there something to that? Like, I believe, and I think this is a huge. This really, I think, is really at the core of a lot of people's political beliefs. Do you think that if people left to their own devices, they are slovenly and society is worse off? Or do you think that if given the space to breathe and explore, we find things that are ultimately useful? I, for one, have picked up crocheting during COVID.
You crocheted your Starfleet uniform.
Why does it have to be useful?
Or I mean, I don't think that has to be useful, but I do think that there's a such thing as human potential. And I think that people are worried that folks would squander it and that there would be an end of innovation. Someone has to keep making the new robot. Somebody has to keep, improving on our imperfections, right? Someone has to
people keep doing that.
Someone has to maintain the garbage robot.
Yeah.
Or invent a better garbage robot.
Again, though, I go back to, I don't think that people would all then become slovenly. I go back to the idea of college and think about when people have resources and things available to them and are encouraged to explore, you do have people who go and they will go to fraternity parties, but they're also very interested in learning about themselves, whether that's by trying to see if they're into engineering or going and studying abroad. And so I think there's something to that idea that, we talk about lifelong learning and we talk about the ideals that I think we probably had when we were 18, 19, 20 in college that don't get extended to us as adults, where it would be great if we had a society where, you live in whatever city you live in, and if you wanted to pursue art, that there was a building bigger than the learning annex where you could go and devote yourself to it just to see if you like it. And if you don't, it doesn't mean that your mortgage is going to, be taken from you.
Mm-hmm. That's the dream. I agree. That's the dream.
That's
I'm not criticizing Star Trek because I think that exists in the Trek universe. We just don't see it. We don't see any kind of portrayal of people who are just kind of wandering, trying to figure it out. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that everybody in any form of art can be working towards, because that's such a terrible idea that you're not a valid member of society if you're not working and contributing something. Yeah. It's like there's some people who were better off if they don't contribute anything. Let them just stay at home and watch cartoons. It's fine. I could be one of them. It's just we beat that into everybody's head, right, left, and center. You must contribute. You must be.